For more on the arraignment of former U.S. President Donald Trump, let's speak now with Lawrence Douglas. He's professor of law, jurisprudence, and social thought at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Professor Douglas, the charges against Trump has now been officially unsealed. As you learn more today, what's your take on the strength of the case against the former president? Is it airtight enough?
It's hard to say whether it's airtight enough. I mean, there are two separate questions I guess we need to ask. One is the legal theory that the prosecution's relying on, is that strong? And basically, it's about the falsifying of business records. And it was really about the falsifying of business records with the intent to commit another crime, namely basically to engage in an illegal contribution to his campaign, that is for the purposes of trying to shield his campaign from the damaging revelations of these past affairs of his. So one thing is, his lawyers will try to attack the integrity or the coherence of the prosecutorial theory. It looks pretty strong. I mean, we should bear in mind that something like falsifying business records is a pretty kind of bread and butter charge that is brought against white-collar criminals. And prosecuting white-collar criminals is basically one of the chief responsibilities of the Manhattan DA's office. The second question to ask is the kind of, assuming that it goes forward with to trial, is the quality of the evidence that would be presented by the prosecution. They'll rely heavily on the testimony of Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer, who himself, as we know, went to prison for criminal violations associated with the charges against Trump. But again, he has obviously a record of not being entirely truthful, like his boss as well. And so, it gives the opportunity for the prosecution, for the defense, to try to attack his credibility.
A statement of facts accompanying the indictment alleges a conspiracy, but there's no actual conspiracy charge. Why not?
I think just, a conspiracy is something where, I mean, if you kind of read between the lines, it sounds as there's basically a conspiracy. Very often conspiracies is a way of linking together a disparate group of people for the purposes of trying to prove a crime. Here, there's not really a particularly large group of people involved. And I don't think it's really necessary for the prosecution to rely on a theory of conspiracy for the purposes of trying to just kind of prove the counts that are being brought against Trump, these 34 different counts, which all, again, all focus on the falsification of business records with this intent to commit this second crime, that is aiding his campaign.
Indeed. Professor, we've seen over the decades how Trump has often leaned on attack and delay tactics across many court cases. Will he stick to his time-tested legal playbook? And if so, will it work this time around?
Well, he certainly will. I assume, we already see him in attack mode. I mean, he's been in attack mode even before the indictment was handed down. For weeks now, he's been calling Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, basically a lapdog of George Soros, a completely unsubstantiated claim. And, this past weekend, he went so far as to call Alvin Bragg a psychopath. And we also see that he's been attacking the judge as a Trump hater and his wife as a Trump hater. And again, it's a very kind of characteristic move on the part of Trump. I mean, his politics is always based on trying to turn everything into a partisan struggle between us and them. There's never any notion that there's neutrality, that there is impartiality, that there are good faith actors out there. It's always a question of good faith on his part versus the bad faith of others. And then with regards to his lawyers, yeah, I assume we will see them trying to delay this process out. And I think certainly what they're going to try to do is they'll probably try to quash the indictment first, and then they'll try to, try to drag this thing out as long as possible, which is, again, something that has, it's a tactic that has worked well for him in the past. It's really not entirely clear how well it will work this time. We should also bear in mind that he is, potentially facing other indictments. And the cases that, if they go forward based on prospective other indictments, they could actually move along quicker than this case in New York. So that's something else for us to bear in mind.
Yeah, speaking about Trump being on attack mode, one question about the indictment was whether there would be a gag order barring Trump and his legal team from publicly discussing this case, especially given the fiery rhetoric from the former president leading up to the arraignment, as you mentioned. But no such gag order was issued.
That's right. I mean, no one asked for the gag order. The prosecution didn't ask for the gag order. And the judge actually even said that had they asked for the gag order, he would not have issued it. And I think one of the things that that I think the prosecution and the judge are rightly trying to avoid is Trump being able to present himself as a martyr of the First Amendment. That what we have now is bogus charges being brought against him, and now an effort to silence him in his expression of his constitutional rights to free speech. That said, I think the judge did issue a warning that to both parties, saying that they shouldn't make any comments that could arguably trigger or incite violence. And it will be interesting to see if Trump is able to engage in that level of restraint in the days to come. I mean, we saw that when he first thought the indictment was coming down, he actually issued something which was really echoed his statement before January 6th. He basically kind of urged people to come out and protest. And again, that could be a dog whistle for people to protest in arguably violent ways. And then he also predicted that death and destruction would follow in the wake of his indictment. So it remains to be seen whether his rhetoric escalates to the point where the judge feels it important to step in.
Professor, Trump has been booked and charged. What can we expect in the next weeks and months ahead?
Well, the process, even if you're not dealing with lawyers who will probably be aggressively challenging everything, every step along the way, the trial can be a lengthy process in the United States, from indictment to trial. And one of the next things that happens is a process called discovery, and that's where the prosecution is basically required to hand the defense much of the evidence that they have, and to give them kind of a signal of the witnesses that they would be calling. The defense has a not exactly reciprocal responsibility, but they also have to kind of present things to the prosecution. And then, of course, there could also be, again, as I said, challenges to the legal theory behind the indictment itself. Because in part it relies a little bit perhaps on federal campaign finance law, and this is a state court proceeding. There'll also be questions about whether the statute of limitations has already expired. Statute of limitations, for the viewers who might not be familiar with that concept, is just this notion that prosecutors are required to bring charges within a certain period of time. Otherwise, the case basically becomes moribund. And so there'll be various challenges along those lines, which, again, could delay things.
Yeah, thank you for helping us make sense of today's events. We've been speaking with Professor Lawrence Douglas from Amherst College. Thank you for joining us.